Tēnā koutou katoa, ko tai mai tēnei rā, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Nau mai haere mai ki te kaunihera o Rotorua, mo te hui tuatahi o tēnei tau. Welcome to our first meeting of the Council, the Operations and Monitoring Committee. It's great to have everyone back around the table. Just a reminder, this meeting is live streamed. Thank you to the members of the public who are here as well. Please turn off your mobile phones and we will take a short break at 11 o'clock and then lunch at 1 o'clock. To kick off our meeting this morning, I'd like to ask our Deputy Chair, Councillor Mercia Yates, to start us off with a karakia.
Nō reira e te iwi, tēnā tātou katua hau mo tēnei. E harako tēnei te karakia o te kaunihera, engari he karakia no Ngāti Whakaue. So just so everyone knows, this will not be the council prayer, it will be a Ngāti Whakaue prayer instead. Nō reira, tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho kia tau wai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te kapua, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e.
Kia ora, Councillor Yates. As this is our first council meeting of the year, I would like to actually invite Her Worship the Mayor to provide some opening statements for us this year.
Kia ora, and thank you, Chair Tapsell, and also for our karakia this morning. Our councillors are all learning the Whakaue karakia and will share it wide and far. So welcome everybody, fellow councillors, board members, te tātou and staff. And I just have to say we're in for a really busy year ahead, if you didn't know already. But we're well aware of it, and I hope you've all had a great summer break. And most of us have been saying that we didn't do a lot of travelling actually, we just enjoyed staying in our own backyard. And that was a great thing, but it was a great thing that the travellers came too. So I'll give you a bit of an overview over summer. It was busy here. For those that got out and about in the community, it was a busy summer, a little bit different. It was good in some sectors and a bit soft in others. So lots and lots of families that we're seeing, which is great. And I do have to say that the mountain biking is proven to be gold to us as a community and a district. And we are seeing shorter stays for people rocking up at the last minute, so probably deciding they're going to get in the car and go somewhere and coming here, and shorter stays, but Airbnb and the hospitality sector is challenged and will continue to be challenged, and New Zealanders are not booking ahead. That's the message, and so this is going to be for the rest of the year. Community safety remains a concern, and we saw that, and I want to congratulate our city wardens and police because a lot of the incidences were well managed, and but that remains a high level concern, and I'm very glad that we've got our community safety strategy still, and we're not there yet. Housing. Actually, if you listen to every mayor in the country, they're all talking now about housing being a high priority. We remind ourselves we signed off a housing strategy in partnership with government, and we're going to be very busy this year working on that strategy. We were also really lucky we didn't have major events, all councillors involved, and I'm sure Stavros with his civil defence and emergency management hat on, you worry about vacations and extra people in town. The quake had no substantial damage, but it is a reminder to us about developing feed-in plans in every community, and they're well underway through council leadership there. And we were just lucky, I think, because that was a big one based around Okataina. It reminds us as being householders and being responsible, get the neighbourhood support moving in the year with a bit of energy, and get our emergency management planning underway with your family. Water, we are so lucky we're not some other councillors around the country. We've got those lakes, but, water management, you can see how dry it is, and no drought announced here, but you can see how very dry it is in our usual areas of Rotorua and around there. We started the year with a wonderful blessing of Te Ahi Tupua, and thank you to those that came. It was very moving. It was an inspiring start to the year, and as already being talked about by many as what a beautiful sculpture now that it's finished and tells such a great local story. So we've got a big year ahead with the long-term plan coming up and more discussions about that. Signalled that at several ratepayer meetings from January, and the focus of our long-term plan on infrastructure, housing strategy and community safety as being large issues that we are going to grapple with as a council. I must say that the ratepayer groups are largely very, very positive. They've got new boards and new committees and new leadership, much more reflective of the communities in which they live, and are working constructively with the community boards, especially over summer, the Lakes Community Board and our staff here at Council. Infrastructure, yes, well, housing, right through the continuum, and we've got that strategy. And there is a report this morning. Just the other reminder about COVID, and while we were very blessed in so many public events we went to, we did say what lucky country we are to still be able to meet. And but salutary reminder to use your Bluetooth and your tracking mechanism. I thought actually the tracking mechanism worked and showed the value of it. And great news that frontline workers will get the COVID vaccination, but we've got to be reminded about that ourselves and our own behaviour. So all of these big challenges, and I'll finish, is going to require leadership and collaboration. So it's about us working together. And when I see us working together on initiatives like our community safety and our housing and our infrastructure challenges, we do remarkably well as a community. So I look forward to a busy year and one of very active participation. So thank you, Chair. That's my brief overview.
You're welcome, and thank you very much, Your Worship. We have had a big break and we certainly will have a big year ahead, so I appreciate you taking the time to set the scene for our council for this year. I would like to move to apologies. Do I call for any apologies? I have one from Rawariwaru. There appear to be none. Can I have a mover? No worries. Would you like to move that, Councillor Kumar? Moved, Councillor Kumar, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. Any urgent items? Yes, Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My query for the acting CE perhaps is that with regards to dog control or animal control business, I had an incident last week where my dog was attacked and I was pursued for about a kilometre by a large brown dog that came out of a resident that is known to accommodate homeless people, and I contacted the animal control people at council, and after several phone calls it turns out that yes, it is owned by a homeless person, and I said, well, is it going to be registered? And she said, well, they haven't got any money. And I'm wondering if that's the rule.
Point of order, Your Worship.
While I'm sorry that you were so actively pursued, I don't see that as an urgent item at all, but something that needs to be noticed operationally.
I agree, Councillor Bentley. It's not an urgent item, but we appreciate you bringing it up, and we will certainly make sure that that's followed up.
Will somebody contact me to tell me when it is registered?
Yes. Yeah, we'll make sure that's done. Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Pleased to report a very urgent item, that is information needed on the Council's policy and consenting process around tiny homes. We've had a number of inquiries from about December onwards. but I've been told this morning that A, there's been a glitch in the email process, and secondly, MBIE is taking charge of a piece of policy development that will in turn have to be related to Council's policies, but fairly soon we'll have clarity in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. We are going to have a housing update from JP to come in this meeting as well, so perhaps I'll just look at him and we'll get that addressed to there. Any other urgent items for this morning? There appear to be none. I now move to page 6. We have confirmation of the minutes of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting on the 5th of November. I ask for a mover and a seconder. Moved Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Maxwell, that the minutes of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting 5th of November be confirmed as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you very much. We move to our staff reports. On page 12, we have the recommendation of financial performance. So I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Financial performance for the 6 months ended 31st of December 2020 be received. Moved Councillor McPherson, seconded Councillor Yates. I invite Thomas to address his report.
Thank you.
Sorry, I need to put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, carried. Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors and board members. Quick presentation. Financial performance for the 6 months ended December 2020. The themes for the 6 months have been very consistent with those that have been reported in the previous O&M committees on the other side of Christmas. So overall revenue itself is, operational revenue is 2.6 million ahead of budget on the back of additional MBE subsidies and other associated revenues. But operating expenses are also tracking higher than budget by about 2.3 to give an overall result of being close to 300,000 better than budget. With regards to how that sits, so again, very consistent with previous areas. So a lot of the, if I was to call it, pain with regards to the financial position is in the regulatory area. That's the area that is under pressure with regards to the parking revenues, but also is incurring additional costs with regards to the inner city safety and the additional security that has been putting in place that is a response to the community's issues raised by the community on the other side of Christmas. Sewage again is just a little bit of depreciation impact, so it's a non-cash impact, and that was there also at the start of the year. But all other activities are either performing well ahead of budget or pretty close to budget as well. It's likely that the only ongoing trend will likely continue in the planning and regulatory with regards to the, while parking revenues are improving, are likely to not achieve budget. And the additional cost of the inner city safety and the additional patrols and costs associated with that will likely continue into the foreseeable future as well. With regards to the breakdown of the overall fees and charges, you'll see there that the majority of the activities are well on track and tracking close to budget. Building services itself is well ahead of the budget that was set on the back of some rather large building consents being filed and processed, but you'll see there that again parking enforcement is lagging a little bit behind where we would like it to be. With regards to our capital expenditure, what we're seeing is as the construction period kicks in, which is generally the summer period where a lot of the activity takes place with regards to particularly roading and resurfacing of roading, stormwater and obviously the main waterworks as well. We're seeing a good uplift in our capital spend. For the month itself, it was split roughly 40%. The work being done was renewal of existing infrastructure and 60% being improvements to our levels of service. You'll see there with regards to the graph of the timing of our expenditure with regards to our actual spend and where it's forecast to be by the end of the year. We are expecting at this stage to come in well and under our year-end spend, and that's on the back of the timing of the museum, the Performing Arts Centre, and the lakefront in particular. And so you'll be aware, I think we're having an update shortly on the Performing Arts Centre. the majority of those are actually well underway and progressing well, but not progressing at the paces where we anticipated the financial budgets to be. Just as a little bit of an example with regards to how some of them are progressing. So you'll see there that the stormwater program is well underway and is about close to 80% of completion of its budget. And you'll see there are a number, lakefront and aquatic centre. There's a little bit of a lag, and as you can understand, this is the snapshot at the end of December, pretty much a month or two into the heavy construction period, and we anticipate a number of these programs have now ramped up and delivery is quite high. In particular, many of you would have probably experienced reseals and the such on some of our urban roads. Skip that one. With regards to debt, at December we were actually tracking and had a repayment of debt, so we actually had less debt than we did at the start of the fiscal year. We are forecasting that to slowly increase over the coming months as our capital works program really gets underway in earnest. But as you can see in the chart in front of you, that while we were projecting a year-end debt of about 276 million, it's not likely that we will get to that level, and will likely come well under, and that's as a result of obviously those key projects that have timing issues, or not issues, they're not progressing as well as the budgets were set with regards to the timing of the museum and the Performing Arts Centre and the lakefront, and the underspend in those capital projects is expected to be reflected in carrying less debt at the end of the year. So overall, year to date, the operating result is on track and tracking ahead of budget. The capital program is broadly in line, except for the timing of those key projects. Debt itself is less than we started the year, and is less than we anticipated at this time of the year. And looking forward to the end of the year, we anticipate our operating result to be on budget or better than budget. The capital program will likely be underspent as a result of those key projects that I mentioned before, and as a result we will likely have therefore less debt at the end of the year as well. Just a little bit of an update, I guess, on COVID and insights. It's just something that we've done before, just to get an understanding of some of the things that we consider as well with regards to the impacts that we have on our community. So it's been interesting watching the last 6 months and the responses that have been happening. Overall, it's emerged that global GDP seems to be growing, even though you would think, reading some of the things that you read, that would not be the case. It really seems to be on the back of mostly emerging markets. The US economy itself, in light of probably the show that has been on display in the media, is actually, with regards to consumer spending, almost at pre-COVID levels. So we've seen that they continue on as if nothing has changed in their world with regards to retail spending. China consumption is actually soaring. So while they had that hard lockdown, a lot of the factories shut down, a lot of imports, exports shut down. The demand globally that seems to be coming about has really meant that their output, and in particular their consumption, is surging. And inflation across the world as a result of probably governments injecting money with the view of keeping unemployment down and keeping people employed, will likely therefore as a whole lead to inflation levels across the world probably higher than what people were expecting pre the pandemic. With regards to New Zealand, travel and leisure activities, while still limited, it's probably still driving quite a bit of demand, as we're probably seeing with our tourism sector here. Industrial production remains patchy, and the supply chain's under significant strain. Those that you probably noticed buying certain items, they're either not in stock and they're waiting, or they're on a ship waiting to dock, or on a ship coming from somewhere else. And logistics, in particular, in delivering goods to New Zealand, seems to be becoming more difficult. as an example, what you're seeing is the result now of, particularly like, I'll use mountain biking as a result, as an example. Factories shutting down in China and Taiwan during COVID, they shut down for 6 weeks. They reopened back up, but they reopened with restrictions with regards to health and safety. So some of their productions never ramped up to pre-COVID levels. Demand for some of those services has outstripped what they were pre-COVID. And so what you're now finding is those factories are actually struggling to keep on top of demand. And then when new shipments arrive in New Zealand, they sell out very quickly. And then once again, you're having to wait for more shipments, and then overlaying that with the impact that the shipping and the logistics have. It is becoming increasingly difficult for some consumer goods, and what we're also seeing is for some items that we require as well with regards to infrastructure. They're becoming scarce and are becoming harder to get, or there's longer lead times. And it'll be interesting to see with regards to how that plays out over the 6 to 12 months and how long that will take to settle down. And obviously vaccine production and how quickly overseas countries roll that out and how quickly they stabilise will determine therefore how that flows through to us. And there's a few other things there. So anyway, with that, happy to, one more slide. With regards to what we're seeing in the banking sector, and in particular credit lines. So what has happened recently is, the top graph there, a significant decline in consumer lending. So obviously that'll have a flow-on effect to retailers in particular. A sharp decline as well into business lending. So again, it'll be interesting to see as to what the flow-on effect is to businesses growing, new businesses starting, and employment numbers. And what we are seeing, and we all can see what's happening with regards to house prices, quite a significant uptick with regards to the house lending. And so the banks are busy, and they're predominantly busy with regards to the lending for mortgages. With regards to the split of how that is looking like, they are seeing with regards to the overall lending to home loans, about 17% is first home buyers, and about 60% is actually people that are already in a home and therefore getting out of that home and buying a new one. And so therefore, obviously the balance of about 20-odd% are people buying investment properties. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the financial performance.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Thomas, just on your commentary on the overall financial picture, I've seen commentary that interest rates in New Zealand appear to have bottomed out, where a couple of months ago they were talking about them going lower further. So with our uplifted debt pushed out into the future, does the prospect of interest rates climbing expose us, or is that factored into your predictions going forward?
So I think pre-Christmas everyone's view was that interest rates would continue to reduce, and there was talk of negative interest rates. It was actually interesting for us with regards to borrowing through the LGFA that we actually saw probably a significant price increase anyway with regards to our long-term borrowing. While we weren't in the market looking for money, we actually saw long-term interest rates in the 10-year cycle moving from 2% to close to 2.5%. And so while only 0.5% doesn't sound like a lot, in a comparison of a percentage basis of from 2 to 2.5, it was actually quite a significant increase over a very short period of time. We're actually seeing that stabilise for us. And with regards to the way we manage Treasury, roughly 1/10 of council's borrowings comes up for renewal on an annual basis. So it does actually take a very long time for council's borrowing to reprice. But in the LTP, and in particularly how we forecast our projected debt, we already have built in a moderate projected increase, because it's very unlikely, historically, based on historical, that the historical lows will continue for a significant period of time. So our forecast increases are built on the back of technical advice from PricewaterhouseCoopers Treasury team. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. Much appreciated. Enjoyed the detail in particular. And I looked at it from a perspective of what of these numbers could change. I noticed that spending is about 2.3 over budget, and the big chunks there are the Infracore spend on job creation, about 940k, but that's covered by an MBIE contract. But I heard this morning driving in that the unemployment numbers are down to about 4%, unexpectedly. That could lead to the MBIE numbers, that program being gradually phased out or lowered. So that's one number that could change. The second number that could change is the 420,000 on expert consultants helping in planning and policy development. So I wondered what these expert consultants have been doing and how would this apparent deficit in our expertise be remedied?
Yes, so for you, Madam Chair, 2 questions there. The NBI program with regards to creation of those work programs post-COVID is actually completed, so there's no more costs associated with that. And secondly, I'm sure that JP is doing a update shortly to the councillors on the housing, that he'd be more than happy to give an update with regards to the technical expertise that we're using to help drive that program.
Great, thanks. One supplementary, if I might, and that is it concerns the stormwater budget, where we all recognise that the backlog in stormwater provision has been a major cause of difficulty. Will that forecast budget for them be adequate?
I think it's a bit hard to ask if it'll be adequate when we're not sure how much it's going to rain. But yes, I think how about we actually bring that question to Stavros, who is our Manager of Infrastructure, because I think that would be more appropriate, if that's okay with you, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, Thomas, around the parking and the fees and charges. So part of the deficit's been offset because you've had really good building consent or fees in that area. So what's the strategy around trying to fix the issue with the under budget in income from parking? Is it, apart from adjusting the budget and offsetting consenting fees, is there a strategy to try and increase parking revenue?
It's just something Jocelyn and I've actually been talking about recently with regards to understanding what the trends there are and understanding what has changed, how it's changed and what needs to be done. So there is work going into that mix. What I don't have at the moment is therefore what is the flow and effect from a budgetary perspective. But it is something that we need to understand better with regards to our pre-COVID trajectory with regards to the new systems, the bedding down of the new system, even then the app coming on board. There was a good uptick with regards to the positive trend in revenues. That obviously took a significant hit post-COVID, and while it has recovered somewhat, that is a piece of work that the team are looking at with regards to how it's bed down and what the future of that does look like.
So we'll wait for the report at the next meeting.
Now, were there any items for discussion anyone wanted to bring up before we move on? There appear to be none. Thank you very much, Thomas. We now move to page 15, to our operational report for November to December. I need a mover and a seconder that the operational report for November to December 2020 be received. Moved Councillor Rotorua Tate, seconded by Councillor Yates. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Welcome, JP. And I believe that JP will also have a PowerPoint for us on the housing strategy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair. I just thought it was appropriate because the homes and thriving communities is such an important priority for the whole of Council that we did a more detailed update than what's been provided, certainly within the strategy section of this operations report. But I think it's also important to reflect that this is a key plank and focus for not only my work but also the GM of operations and the GM of infrastructure. So if you read across the full operations report, you actually see a lot of the content I'm about to provide in this presentation shown or repeated through those other sections of the report. So in part I'll cover it as an overview, but there may actually be an opportunity for you to drill into more detail as you see those other GMs presenting. So just on that basis then, really wanted to give you an update on the progress around the strategy in its entirety and the work we are doing with our partners for those various developments. As you're aware, we set a regulatory framework, we invest in infrastructure, and we're now looking more actively at partnering. But at this stage, we certainly do not own all the land, and we certainly do not build all the houses. So that's where we have to work with the partners, both from a government and a local development sector, to achieve those wider outcomes for the city. So then I'll just talk about what's being involved in some of those actions to accelerate residential development, an update on the plan changes, and just some of the future actions we'll be reporting back to you on. So probably the first part of it is, again, just talking about the partnerships and relationships. So moving on from our interim leadership group that helped us shape the Homes and Thriving Communities group, we've now got in place some joint meetings with the key government departments to make sure, even on a fortnightly basis, we're meeting, we're talking and looking at opportunities for them to acquire land or to support them in building homes, and looking also at how we're working with them in the support of those who are currently in emergency housing or in transitional housing. So that's particularly strong with MSD, Ministry of Housing, Urban and Development, MHUD, and obviously Kaingoora. So key meetings in that space, but also very much looking forward to working with them and getting an understanding of the commitments that are coming from government as we head towards a budget round in May. But also we're working very hard with those key agencies on what is the medium-term strategy around the use of motels. So how do we see that either increasing the support, increasing the focus to make sure they are good places for people to be whilst homes are being built. And obviously also we're working very specifically with iwi landowners, private landowners, and mana whenua groups on development across the district as well. So a range of networks and meetings that involved out of my team, but also the GM of operations, GM of infrastructure as well. So just a bit of a picture of where things are up to with the Pukehangi plan change. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can just see the yellow area highlighted. So that was the area of that plan change. So that's been through its hearing process. So this was the fast-track plan change provisions. So the commissioners have now produced their report, and it's sitting with the Minister for sign-off to enable that plan change. There's been some couple of comments about stormwater, and obviously the opening up of this area for residential development. The critical importance here is the management of stormwater. So that was some of the actions that were built into that set of commissioners' reports. So really, and Stavros will talk more about this, which was that stormwater master catchment planning. So he'll talk a bit more about that within his presentation. But equally then getting down to a stormwater management plan for the stormwater that would come off this area as a residential development, and then how that fits together to shape a comprehensive consenting framework. So we're now just working up what needs to be done between ourselves and the landowners, and also then we've met with the regional council about establishing a memorandum of understanding, just so we can progressively work through those pieces so that they're comfortable with the deliverables and we can keep moving forward quickly. We cannot proceed with any residential development across this area unless we've resolved the stormwater issues that need to be dealt with there. So obviously this has a huge influence on the two streams that run through the western side of the city, so the Utahina and Mankakahi. So again, Stavros will give you some more detail of that catchment master planning level and some of the investment that's going into detailing some of those remedies for climate change, the design capacity of our infrastructure, and obviously the future residential growth. So just flipping across to the eastern side, Ngāti Whakaue tribal lands, they're in full development mode around stage 1 of their whananui development. So if you recall, I think it was early last year, they received a consent for about 180 lots across 3 stages. So the first stage is now going into its civil, and in September the diggers will move on to starting to undertake the works on, the earthworks for stages 2 and 3. So across that 3 stages, there's approximately 180 to 200 lots being created. So a very clear development plan, and again with Stavros's work around the master planning, really identifying the potential catchment areas that can be developed to use that Crown Infrastructure Partnership funding to make sure that we have the relevant stormwater catchment and attenuation ponds in place to support and accelerate that development. So I've mentioned before, we have to see how that works across going through our existing residential areas, but also dealing with those wider catchment planning areas. Now later in the presentation, I've just got a slide which talks about the number of consented lots in train for the last 6 months. This predates that, so the 180 to 200 lots that have been developed across these 3 stages is separate from the numbers I'll give you later on, and separate from the numbers that the GM of Operations has included in her part of the report as well. And finally, just down the bottom there, the East Side Wellness Plan is proceeding through, so they've had their submissions and that's reported in the report you have in front of you, and we're still proceeding with the structure planning part, leading to a plan change for the rest of the Ngāti Whakaue tribal lands block, heading out towards Eastgate and the airport, so that work's underway as well.
Yes, Your Worship. Okay, yes.
Yeah. So councillors, again, just talking about one of the other key pieces, it was included within the spatial plan, but equally in the homes and thriving communities, and that was the importance of the inner city for that increased residential development as well. So an important bringing additional people into the inner city to support the vibrancy and viability of the city. So just before Christmas, we received the first draft of a piece of work that we had commissioned Darrell Church Architects to complete, which was a stock take of all the strategies we've had around the inner city for the last 15 years. So it went right back to, I think, an Opus report in 2006. So that's become an important sort of stake in the ground for us of understanding all the proposals, all the initiatives, all the actions and priorities that we've had for the last 15 years around the CBD. And that's been a critical piece for us to say, look, having done that, now we've got a piece there on which to build a future plan for the CBD. So part of that is driven by the requirements around the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, but also what do we need to adapt to ensure the vibrancy of the CBD in the longer term, as we see a lot of consumer behaviours change, and certainly for the near future, no international visitors spending in our CBD as well. So a critical step there. So the next piece from that is we'll be bringing that report to you in a workshop, just so you get an understanding of how those pieces have been summarised and what we see as the potential actions leading out from that. But also, and critically important, is beginning the conversations with mana whenua around how they want to be involved in that next stage of planning for the inner city. Obviously the Chamber of Commerce and the various city groups that have been involved. And the key reference I'd make there was to that red sector group that came together during lockdown to start thinking about ways of supporting the CBD's development. So really important. And then some of the actions that flow out of that, I've got EG incentives policy, so I've done some work there, which is one of those key actions from that sector group. How do we promote residential development? So there's obviously planning and regulatory functions, but there's also the potential to start providing some targeted incentives to support that investment in residential development. So we'll start working through this in parallel, talking to those different stakeholder groups as well. Just the other piece there about alignment with other initiatives. So obviously the GM of Infrastructure presented to you, I think earlier last year, 3 options for the roading changes within the CBD. Equally, the Regional Council is now looking at undertaking a review of public transport across the city. So that's obviously critically important to support the inner city from a development perspective, but also a connectivity, and it also links obviously to our climate action plan and things like that as well. So all of these things need to be aligned. And equally, we need to finish and conclude those important place-making, place-shaping projects, which give some support and linkage to the inner city as well. Lakefront, Sir Howard Morrison, and the museum. And later on, I think the GM of Operations will be talking to you about a safety plan, so citywide, but also with a clear focus on the inner city as a critical issue as well. So another piece of work that we've spoken to you about before, and it touches on the councillor's question around use of consultants. So we've commissioned a piece of work from a consultancy to review our rules around infill. So provide an objective view of how we proceed and support the subdivisions, residential subdivisions. So in part, that's at its smallest stake is cutting a section in half and putting another house on the back, and then you start going into multi-unit and obviously wider subdivisions. So they're undertaking a piece of work for us in that space. The reason why I've got the point 2 there, just talking about the alignment with the spatial plan growth requirements, is for those who had been around when we shaped the spatial plan, 40% of our growth was to be included within the current residential area. So whilst there's a large focus on greenfield, we have to remember intensification is an important way for us to deal with population growth and providing the different typologies of homes that people need, depending on family size or as they age as well. So that's a critical piece of work for us to complete. So that should be completed in the next couple of weeks. And there's also a reference in my report about working with developers and builders to make sure we're refining our processes as much as possible. I think the first meeting was held back in October, but as part of this infill and residential subdivision piece, we're also doing work with developers, landowners and builders in the same space. So that's critical for us to make sure we're taking this multi-pronged approach, because we've got such a large amount of homes to make up for as a city, and also needing to make sure that we're building successful communities around them. Unlocking residential land, we've done a lot of work looking at available land blocks across the city. Now we continue to talk to those government departments about options for them to undertake their feasibility or considering purchasing them for social housing development. So that's the key focus at this stage. So we continue to act as eyes and ears for them in our community, looking for blocks of land to provide them some options. Another piece of work that we're currently undertaking is, whilst we've led on these large plan changes, we're now looking at options to support owners to consider smaller private plan changes. Often landowners see those with significant dread because they have quite high bars of geotech, transport, stormwater. So how do we support them to unlock some more pieces of land within the priority areas we've identified within the spatial plan? So again, this all comes back to needing to have a multi-pronged approach, and there's no silver bullet anywhere to accelerate residential housing development. And just an idea of what's happening with some of those other agencies. So Kāinga Ora is continuing to identify sites. So again, I talked about the sheet that we've got. We've passed through to them on potential sites that they're developing. And they are now building their local liaison and coordination capacity here to try and get more sites developed. And just the last report I had is they've currently got 33 homes that are moving into the construction phase. So as you know, they're tending to pick up their current sites either remove existing homes and undertake some intensification. So I think we previously reported on those numbers of homes that were being consented, but this is the next tranche of those 33 additional homes. And finally, and this has been reported in the operations report under the GM of operations as well, just picking up almost our post-lockdown pickup in the last 6 months there. You can see number of dwellings consented 105, number of consented lots 106, and I know Jason in the planning department are currently processing consents for approximately 150 new lots. So this is outside the plan change areas and outside the Ngāti Whakaue tribal lands development area as well. So there is activity. I think there was a point, and it's previously been reported on our consenting stopping through lockdown and immediately post-lockdown, but we're starting to see that pick up again. And obviously there's a huge amount of demand there that needs to be serviced. So, councillors, I think that was pretty much my update. Again, there's an opportunity, if I can't answer the questions, that we can traverse back to them with the relevant GMs later on. And apart from that, happy to answer off any other questions from my part of the report.
Thank you very much, JP. I think we'll take questions first on the presentation, and then we'll open up to the wider operations report. Were there any questions? I have Your Worship, the Mayor.
Back to the Wharenui block, if you put that slide up, Isabel. Just, there was a bit there, I think it's stormwater, and then just block development, additional block development. What's that?
So what is critical in that space is, as we start saying that the government provide us that Crown Infrastructure Partnership funding for the development to accelerate development across the Wharenui block, stormwater doesn't stop and start on that block. Actually, there is a network of stormwater overland flow paths, detention areas and infrastructure that leads all the way down through the lake. So I think what's been achieved, and Stavros will be able to elaborate on it further, is when you take a network view, there's actually an opportunity to make sure that infrastructure that's been provided for that total network is actually supporting other blocks and their potential to develop as well.
Briefed in a workshop. Great. Thank you.
Councillor Yates.
Kia ora, and through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that report, JP. I do have a question, and it follows on from a few slides from here where you were talking about land development. Now, you might not know the answer to this, but I'd like to lay this question here for you to follow up with, because we do have land that was purchased in Kotu for development off Ian Street that is lying unattended at the moment. So that's an area that I would prefer us to be looking at as well. As a section in the middle of Whitaker Road, Panui Road and Bennett's Road, which has been an eyesore for a very long time, I am aware that it is zoned by overseas investors. But once again, when we start talking about locality, that's a prime opportunity for our community to be living closer to town. But the impact of the land, because you not only talked about certain things like landfill, obviously those are things that need to be taken into consideration, but if you could potentially follow up for those two pieces, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, Madam Chair, just to reassure you, both of those blocks of land are on our long list, and so some of the work we're doing to support potential investors or Kāinga Ora or other developers is to try and answer some of the questions that have led to these pieces of land being undeveloped. So we're trying to make sure we've got some clarity about, are there any problems and how do you solve them, or at least give people as much information as possible to try and make use of those blocks of land.
Thank you. Very good question. Mr. Hurd, followed by Councillor Kumar and Councillor Rokawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, JP. This is more of a comment than a question. I have had the benefit of having a bit of a pre-look at the CBD plan with JP the other day, and in 2 words, it's absolutely brilliant. It's spot on the money. It's got the right level of detail. It's asked all the right questions and will lead to a really constructive debate. And I know there's a workshop on next Wednesday, and I apologise in advance that it clashes with our strat plan day, so I won't be able to make it, but well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP, for your presentation. I don't know whether this is relevant or not to what I'm going to ask, but you can certainly highlight that to me. You did mention that something about the motels and hotels and how you are talking with the owners as to see just what the frame of mind is going to be. My question is for the purpose of wanting to know a couple of things. One is, for the purpose that the motels were used for short-term emergency, how long is this short-term? Because from when it started, we didn't have a crystal ball and we didn't know what the answer was. It's almost like asking when the flights are going to open up. Nobody's got a crystal ball and we don't know, so they're taking it month by month. So now that it was almost a year ago that we've had this problem, where do we look at now to know that this could be, that there could be an end, or are we still taking it month by month? And the other thing is, because we've taken the change of use for these motels and hotels, the government probably wanted a short-term solution, which is then become somewhat of a problem because it's become a long-term situation. How do we know whether they fit the resource consent purposes for what it was? Do we just let it go, or do we now see that this did need a long-term resource consent, and how do we address this?
There's quite a bit in that, and Councillor, it's incredibly relevant. And I've just flicked back to this slide here, which is really some of the conversations we're having with government now. You're absolutely right. It was promoted as a short-term use of motel accommodation to house people on an emergency and a transitional basis. As we've seen, it's turned into a longer-term solution. And so there is a lot of discussion underway with government, and hence the bullet point there is also an agreement around a medium-term strategy on the use of motels. I think anyone who's got children and who's been in a motel with children knows the inadequacies of a motel for an extended period, and that is clearly what we're seeing from the perspective of families and managing families in what should be temporary accommodation, but being used on a longer term basis. And equally, the other issues that we're seeing also with antisocial behaviour and some of the other access to support services within a facility that's not set up for it. So I think that's part of the longer term discussion is who some of these need to be consented, repurposed, so that they are more appropriate to house people and families for an extended period. So that is part of that conversation that we're undertaking with the government, and it's critical. So we can't keep using this Band-Aid when we know we're moving out into the medium-term framework. So it is a hot topic, and it is one that is being discussed for all the issues you've raised.
Thank you, JP. Quite contented with that answer. I just wanted to know if I can supplementary ask, while we are looking at solutions for this, because we are a tourist destination, and maybe Michelle can probably highlight this, how much accommodation is really available for tourists now, the fact that most of these motels are taken up for the purpose of this? I don't want to use the word homeless. It's almost a dirty word. It's almost like they don't have to be frowned upon because local government and central government put them there.
I think you've had the acting CEO of Rotorua Economic Development here before, and he has indicated to you that it has significantly impacted on our available accommodation. So we have 3 major hotels taken out with managed isolation, and a significant number of our motels being used for housing. So it has created, there is only a small proportion where there is no use being undertaken in that purpose, so it remains solely for visitors. So it is impacting on the accommodation sector and on the tourism sector for the city. So I think I can report back. We get updates from MSD about what motels are being used and what their occupancy rates are. So potentially I could bring that information to give you an overview to the workshop planned for next week. But there is a significant proportion of our motels being used, and it is impacting on our economy.
Thank you, JP. And on that, I'd just like to remind councillors that the workshops are a really good opportunity for us to dive into that detail and really set that vision for what we want in the future. Her Worship, on this point, and then I'll go to Councillor.
Just on that point, it is valid, and it was well canvassed in our workshop in December about community safety. And it gives me no comfort as the Mayor of this town that we've got mothers and children in the numbers in motels, and that's not a long-term fix. I totally agree with you. Also a reminder that we had the Minister of Tourism here, and we briefed him on the reputation of our town about the use of motels for short-term accommodation, and well aware of that impact. So we've all got to work together on that. That's why I said that earlier. We've got to paste a consistent message to our business leaders and to our ministers of the Crown, and we're going to have to show real leadership on this to clean up what is a really good strategy, but there's many, many movable parts to it.
Thank you. Councillor O'Kawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine's really just to follow up and comment on what Councillor Kumar said, and the questions that you asked, Councillor Kumar, is what I was going to ask. But I feel if we want to have a vibrant city, then perhaps we should have shown leadership earlier on to MSD and the Ministry of Health. Our managed and isolated facilities and the homeless and the various motels, and we're trying to get tourists back into the city. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work. People don't want to come here because if you go down Fenton Street, we've got motels beside each other, and so when they look across the road and they see, as someone rang me the other day, beds and mattresses piled outside one, and it's not a good look. So, I mean, we can have all the wonderful plans that want to bring vibrancy into the city, which is great, and it's good to hear that this plan is, is hitting that mark. But we need to make sure that we are saying, move, what's happening here, and put a time frame on it, because that's the relationship that we should be having with central government. Otherwise, we're getting these things imposed on us all the time, and it's really quite disappointing, actually. Because we want to support the inner city and everything that we're hearing that's going up there. But, no, it's not a good look. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. My comments follow the comments I've just heard, and I'm intrigued by the Council's role as being eyes and ears for ministry departments, MSD, MHUD and Kaingaora. And I wondered, as a matter of fact, how much land the Council actually owns that could be redeployed into housing.
Not a lot, Councillor, is the short answer. We have a significant amount of land that has vested reserves or stormwater catchments. So for infrastructure and our community infrastructure, we've got huge parcels of land, but it's not for the purposes of housing. So we'd have to go through processes to change that. So actually the amount of land that we hold freehold and developable is quite modest in this across the city. So my comment about eyes and ears is obviously across our organisation and out into a community, there's significant relationships we have with landowners, with iwi groups, with business people and developers, and so that's the networks that we're using to make sure we're able to support a government department that doesn't have enough people on the ground to develop those networks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Councillor Yates, followed by Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I do have a supplementary, JP. Now, when we're talking about this, and we're talking about coordination and partnerships, it's clearly evident, as has become really relevant this week through the Daily Post exposure, that perhaps we do not have a coordinated effort going on across not only the hotels and motels. We might have it at a strategic level amongst central government agencies and local council, but it is not coordinated out there, and we're getting a heck of a lot. And Meripeka raised it, we've all raised it, we all know it, we all see it, and we're not happy about it. What does that effort look like to coordinate through the Moteliers, through the Tiny Deans of this world, through LifeWise and other professional entities that are dealing with the homeless, how can they be brought together to address this issue?
I think it's a very good question, and I think it does. As we trip over issues, there's an opportunity for us to learn from them. So I think there was some media over the last week talking about a proposed development in the inner city. So that was the first we had heard of it, and when we contacted the people we're working with in Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, they were surprised to hear about it as well, as was MSD. So there is a joining up opportunity here. So one of the things that we've undertaken to do, and the GM of Operations is just leading that, is to write to a building owner that was cited in our proposal and just say, look, where a development is being talked about, it's really important that you make contact with the council to get an understanding of any resource consenting requirements, any building consenting requirements, and any earthquake strengthening requirements. And outside of those, obviously, regulatory pieces, there is an opportunity to talk to them about some of the wider implications, because a building and whatever it's being used for has an influence on our public space and our community around it. So there is a chance to have that wider conversation. So really for us, and again, this is an opportunity in a public meeting to say, anyone who's considering developments in our city, please come and talk to the council, come and talk to our planning department, who are keen to talk to you and give you an outline of the feasibility and viability of ideas, rather than just floating them in the media as the first opportunity. I think the key here is making sure we're helping owners, leaseholders, service providers make the right decisions and get the right kind of consenting and planning advice in advance.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. JP, just a question around page 16 of your report, where you said there was a workshop held where we were trying to understand the barriers to development, consenting and building processes, and obviously some of the stuff you've talked about up here relevant to stormwater and things like that relates to development. But what were the sort of issues that came out around barriers to consenting and building processes?
Council, I can't remember the highlights, but I think it's the certainty question. So a lot of the issues relate to clarity around geotech requirements and obviously the infrastructure provision. So those were two of the key areas, and also the time frames related to that. So that's probably some of the highlights. I can provide you with the notes that came out of that workshop, and just so you've got some reassurance, that workshop that was undertaken by the planning manager and Rosemary Viskovich from my team, so they facilitated that workshop. That information has been passed on to the consultants who are working on the infill rules piece as well. They will be making separate contacts with some of those developers and builders who participated, just in case on reflection they've got anything else additionally to add to that. So those are the key headlines that I can recall, and that's certainly been fed into that process review.
So is there going to be a review about the time and the barriers just in general to consenting and those building processes that we as a council can actually make it a lot easier for people to do? I think this is your option 2 under your model that you are proposing under the LTP.
Certainly, Councillor. The key inputs here is the piece we've picked up on how do we enable infill and better subdivisions. So how do we support those? So that's the key focus that we've placed up here. The other general issues on consenting and process improvement, I know the planning manager has picked up those and are examining what parts of our normal processes need to be reviewed and strengthened. So yes, that input's been invaluable for the planning department from a continuous business improvement, but also for a specific outcomes we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you. That actually leads on to the question that I was going to ask too, which is around how are we supporting our consenting team to deal with the extra load that's coming on, and whether we needed to look at providing them with more capacity or even more support. And I know that has come up in the past where we focused on separate people to deal with the smaller consents so the bigger ones can come through. But that is the face of the council when it comes to housing for our community. So we can talk about that more in the workshop. Thank you very much for your presentation, JP. And I just want to check if there's any other questions for JP on the strategy group report. This is from page 16 to 21. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, JP, it was around the Rotorua District carbon footprint. I think it's really a question for Stavros, but I did note there the emissions from stationary energy, consumption of electricity, etc. And I just wanted whether Stavros could comment on, are we on track in terms of RLC showing leadership in this space with our LED conversions? Because I know that was needed to be completed by the end of this financial year to get the NZTA subsidy.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could respond to Deputy Mayor's question. Yes, the answer is we are obligated to complete that program by June this year, because that's the condition of the NZTA 85% funding, so we are on track to do that. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hurd.
Through you, Madam Chair, I continually find myself wanting to jump in and talk, and I realise I'm talking on the Chamber's behalf, not the Rural Board, and I'm here with a Rural Board hat on. So here's a genuine Rural Board question. Breaks 20. There's a comment there about the Mayor's task force and working with Pūtakinui. I know Pūtakinui, who they are, we work with them too. They do a great job, but there's really no rural connection for rural jobs in that group, and I'm wondering if we can facilitate that some way, because rural people need to employ people as well.
I can update you on this because I'm on that Mayor's Task Force for Jobs in Wellington, and there are some very good trials in the country about rural sector, but learning from that can come back to Pūtakinui is our youth strategy here that was worked out collectively right across the district. So the opportunity to lead openings for jobs in our rural sector can be fed through to the leadership group of Pūtakinui. And you're welcome to coordinate with them. There does need to be coordination. I was contacted last night to support another agency working on youth into jobs locally, and I asked them, are you linked in with Pūtakinui? They didn't know about it. I think we're trying to make that the channel for everything to do with youth and employment and staircasing into employment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kaifong, last question.
Right. Just in relation to the Community Resilience Fund, just wanted to, when that was set up, that was around the impacts of COVID and community support for building capacity. And just looking at some of these applications that have been funded, they almost look like business as usual kind of applications, and perhaps could have been funded by other gambling charity or charitable trusts like the Energy Trust or the Gaming Trust. So just wondering around the application of the original purpose of that fund to some of these applications.
I might just ask, we do have the chair of that fund, Councillor Yates, here, if you would like to answer.
Most certainly, and they are certainly not, none of the items listed on page 18 are business as usual entities, and they also possibly, some of them have been seed funded as well, so match funded in part to contribute towards them, but every single one of these entities on here have all come out of a post-COVID reflection on their, if they were business as usual, something had to adapt in order for them to move forward, but every single one of these applicants are valid.
Thank you. And just check there were no other questions for the strategy group. No, thank you very much, JP. I now invite our Group Manager for Operations Group, Jocelyn Mikaire, to the table. We are on page 21 of our agenda, and we have a PowerPoint presentation for us this morning about the Community Safety Update.
Tēnā tātou. Just by way of context, we had, this has been prepared for us by Rosemary, who is not available to attend this morning. She is doing jury service, so I'm stepping in with Richard Horn to provide any further information and responses to any questions. So, here's the thing. You'll be aware that towards the end of last year, we had an increasing amount of concern around some behaviours and safety issues within our city centre. In response to that, we actually, prior to some of those becoming, we'd been thinking about the issue of community safety and had an LTP, elected members workshop, in early December. And we've summarised that, and we'll be coming back to councillors next week at the next workshop that's been set up. So we have a number of immediate council responses that we've taken on board, and of course the next step is around developing a community safety plan. Some of the immediate stuff that we did was around our safety patrols. We looked at the hours that our CCTV cameras were operating. We did put together a bit of a community safety task force within the council just to make sure that we were covering all our bases as we headed into Christmas. Richard has regular contact with our police services just to ensure that we're all connected and linked up across the board. And of course, SIPTED is an important part of the design of our open spaces, and we've assessed around the CBD, and we'll be doing assessments around Fenton Street just to ensure that we have good safety when we're putting things in place. Next slide. There's some priority work that we've identified. So one is looking at our network plan. The network plan is to do with our CCTV cameras and perhaps extending the look and feel of our CC cameras out into across the community, so a bit more broadly than just the inner city area. But we also are thinking about it being a bit more responsive in terms of when hotspots are identified. An example of that at the moment would be Fenton Street. And the other area of priority work that we're doing at the moment is with respect to a temporary liquor ban. In the area, we've had a number of complaints around consumption in the sanitarium reserve, Tingai Road, Amuho Street Extension and Amuho Street, and we've had we had discussions with the police. We've had a number of complaints from our community who are living in that area, as well as some contact with the youth centre in there. And we're looking at putting a temporary liquor ban in place. That will help with both our enforcement and the police enforcement in that area. There is a process around putting a temporary liquor ban in place, and I will get Una to speak to it a bit more, but it does require a resolution by council, which means we need 14 days notice. And so we just wanted to discuss some options this morning around whether we will be bringing a paper to SPNF next week, but I wanted to hand to Una just to discuss the process a bit more and then perhaps get a steer around the level of urgency.
So, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that, Jocelyn. I suppose just to highlight the process around a bylaw extension, I guess, in this case, and the question comes down to a decision or direction from yourselves as to how urgent you see this item and what can we as a council do to expedite moving this forward. Under a normal process, so a development or extension to a bylaw would be reviewed and go through the SPNF committee, of which would be recommended to council. under the current timelines, that council meeting is the end of February with a 14-day notification period. So at a minimum, you would be looking at being able to actually enforce or actually start to do any regulation and compliance within that extension to the bylaw from around mid-March. So the question comes down to then about how the significance of this issue and whether there was a feeling around the table to put in measures to expedite the notification of a bylaw. The tools that we do have in that regard would be to call an extraordinary council meeting, at which stage you can bring forward that notification period and potentially be in a position to have that extension to the bylaw in place by the end of February. So that's just an idea of the process and the timeline, and the question is then over to yourselves around the significance of the issue for yourselves.
We'll open it up for discussion. Her Worship the Mayor.
Thank you for that process overview, Una. Look, I'd certainly support expediting this. This is an issue that was raised to me by the manager of the Youth Centre Trust with quite high level of concern about both antisocial behaviour caused by consumption of liquor around the Youth Centre Trust. And I'm very pleased actually that this has come to us at our first meeting this year. You've moved quickly. We need to show real response here around the hotspots that are problematic for us, and I would urge supportive councillors and board members here to call for that moving forward to be able to expedite it to the end of February. It's the beginning of February. Our processes are slow, but when we know, this was raised with me over a month ago, and of course Christmas is the time when we don't get together, so I urge support for this issue. It is a high profile issue in our community. It's not a good example around where young people gather. They themselves are concerned and feeling vulnerable, as are some of our citizens around that area, and it just makes logical sense to fast track it as much as we can to show we mean to respond to the hotspots in our community. So thank you for that work, Una, and I would move that we support an urgent meeting, an extraordinary meeting, so that we could expedite this process. But others may want to contribute.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Jocelyn, for bringing this up. I understand we wouldn't need a motion for it, so we don't need it to be moved, but we could lodge it as an action point, which would mean that, shall you wish, and we'll open it up for discussions, or if you have any questions, we will be able to hold an extraordinary council meeting to be able to put this liquor ban in place, because I agree waiting until the full council meeting and then another 14 days is just too high risk for a high profile issue in our community. But we open it up for discussion or any questions. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, fully would support the process that's been discussed, and not just the Youth Centre Reserve, but I heard Sanatorium Reserve referred to also. There have been a number of unsettling and unsavoury incidents in there that have frightened people, with people gathering and lurking down there to consume alcohol, and so fully in support.
Any other? We can get a couple of nods around the table. One thumbs up. Okay, well, it appears that we all are in favour of holding an extraordinary council meeting. Personally, I'm quite surprised we didn't have a liquor ban in that area. It would make sense to, and I'd be very happy to support that we move this through as quickly as possible. So we'll take that as an action point, and Una, I'll get you to schedule an extraordinary council meeting, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Jocelyn, was there any other areas you wanted to bring up?
No, it was the end of the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Richard. I'll open up 4 questions for the Operations Group report, which is on page 21 to page 32. Are there any questions? Councillor Yates.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I would like to talk around and congratulate, because I've certainly noticed the extension of City Safe Guardians and safety patrols in our CBD. So nei rā te mihi kia koutou, certainly looking a lot more, supported in that space. But one area that I would like to alert us or alert you to is around the aquatic centre, and in particular a particular gate that verges onto the council reserve there that has been accessed by people who are staying in the backpackers down there. That's becoming a huge concern for not only residents in that particular area, but also patrons of the aquatic centre. So either a security camera or security guards down there would be what's requested from the community. That's come as a complaint to me personally, so kia ora.
Kia ora. Who worships the me?
I'm also thinking you've got the dog impoundings here, and Peter, I've been thinking about the issue that you confronted. I wonder when we have the extraordinary meeting if we look at dogs shouldn't be in those motels. So I wonder if you have a look at that. In my view, they shouldn't be there. There are mothers and children, and there are others who may be frightened. I know most people who are dog owners can't take their dog to a motel. So why is there an exception? That may be something that could come back to the extraordinary meeting.
Yes, Councillor Bentley, followed by Councillor Donald.
Yes, having yesterday witnessed a issue with the security people trying to control a very out of control woman, and it was probably 40 minutes of screaming and foul language before the police actually did turn up, and this is in the middle of Rotorua Street. Certainly didn't make me proud to be a Rotorua citizen having to sit there and witness that, given that the person involved appeared to be as high as a kite and so forth. But my other question for this group is, who authorised the removal of the sequoia down the lakefront?
I believe, sorry, I won't get you to answer that because that has been addressed in the emails that we've received, so I don't think we need to go any further with that.
So the person that authorised it just gets away with it?
It's in the emails that we've already had as elected members. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question through you, Jocelyn, is regarding the liquor licensing bullet point on page 24. 9 new applications since October and 23 renewals, which is down on this time last year. So just in terms of net licences, have we got a reduction in, do we know, is there a reduction overall in the number of liquor licences, both on and off? Just wondering, perhaps Kurt can help us out there.
Morena, thank you for the question. It is a little bit of a tricky one, and I think as a result of, or definitely as a result of COVID, we have seen a bit of ebbing and flowing. What we have noticed is we've certainly seen some businesses close or change, but equally there have been new operators taking advantage of the situation to start up afresh. So I think it would be fair to say it's still in a bit of an evolving trend at this stage.
Just a supplementary, Madam Chair, Kurt, if a new operator steps in, does that require a new licence? They don't just have existing rights?
It does depend on the nature of what's happening at the site. So they can have a temporary authority if they're basically taking over the same premise that was there previously. But in other cases, yes, they may have to start from scratch if there's a significant change in how they're operating their premise.
Thank you. Were there any other questions on Operation Group Report? Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Jocelyn and the team. I just wanted to also note, I fully support what Her Worship the Mayor's just mentioned earlier on about animal control. But my question is also on animal control. And I was just wondering, do we have the numbers for the adoptions from the pound, because I know that prior to lockdown and during that time there were a lot of adoptions, from many places, and has that. And then further on, there were some problems. People actually weren't prepared for the animals and etc. So I was wondering if that has had any effect on our impoundings or our adoption numbers or rate. Thank you.
I don't have the numbers on adoptions. I can get that and put that into the report for next month. Yeah.
Thank you.
That sounds good. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jocelyn. On page 26, there's a brief reference to PC3, Special Natural Areas, and there's some sort of a change alluded to there. The Rural Board has felt as though it's got a keen interest in this. Our rural people are very sensitive to it, and I'd just like to know whether the Rural Board was involved in that decision or not. We felt as though things have been slipping through without our input.
So the Plan Change 3 came through Council towards the end of last year, and prior to that it went through SPN. And we had full public submissions around Plan Change 3. Following adoption, we've now made contact, or beginning to make contact with all the affected landowners, so it has been through a full process.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fully support that we need to have a look at animal control issue. I think it's just a few ignorant ones that have spoiled it for a lot of the others. Most of that came in that situation were good families. They had pets and they were vulnerable, but just a few mongrels out there worse than the animals.
Yeah. Well, that appears to be all the questions, and I believe we now have a second PowerPoint presentation from Jocelyn on Te Ahi Tupua. And I'd like to also welcome our Community Arts Advisor, Mark, our Manager of Arts and Culture, Stuart, and of course Iraya and Stacey, who have been some of the masterminds behind designing this beautiful sculpture. Welcome.
Tēnā tātou. You'll be aware that last week we had a karakia marking the final part of our installation of Te Ahi Tupua, and we had that with our partners down at Te Ahi Tupua. It was a early morning event. So I wanted to take the opportunity today to bring the designer of Te Ahi Tupua to provide his kōrero around the design, Stacey Gordine, and of course Iraya Keel from Te Puia are here. And I wanted to bring them through because the project has taken a number of years to be completed, and I wanted to ensure that our councillors had the opportunity to hear from the designers about the design, and we also have a bit of a video to share as well. So I thought if we start with the video, and then I'll hand over to gentleman on my left, and we can have the brief presentation. Kia ora.
koe. Tēnā korua ko tai mai I tēnei ata. Nau mai haere mai ki Wanganui a mātou. Just want to welcome both Iraia and Stacey this morning, and we'll hand the mic over to you guys now.
Tēnā koe. Me tīmata I a ngā toro irangi I piki I te atia I te tihi o Tongariro. Ka kinongia tana kiri te mātao ka aue atu rā ki ona tuahine. Ka haria mai te ahi te wākainga kia ngata rā te hia kaharuru mai te whenua ao, te whenua pō. Ka tatu mai ki tana taha mahu atu I a rāua te wera me te ahi te tahatā ka mātatoru. Ka māraratia noho tonu rā te mamāua ki te whakarewa tanga te ope tau a wāhia o tihei Mauriora. Mauriora kia koutou, hei te whare tēnā koutou katoa. Kei te manukura, tēnā koe. Kia kia Stacey, kei te Your Majesty, tēnā rawa atu koe. Koe ana tēnā tātou e huitahi nei ki te kōrero I prāne ki tēnei taonga nui whakaharahara ki ana ko te ahi tupua. It is our privilege to come here today and to have a brief kōrero about this beautiful sculpture. The tauparapara, or the first part of the patere, composed by the late Mauri Ora Kingi, pays reference to this cultural narrative of our esteemed tohunga, spiritual navigator Ngā Toroirangi. As many of us know, he was the navigator, the spiritual guardian that guided safe passage of our Te Arawa Waka to these shores many years ago. So for us, for the New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts Institute, the opportunity to capture that narrative and to create such a masterpiece, if I may say so, and capture that is, for us, is wonderful. I guess for us it achieved our mandate and why we were at the inception of the New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts Institute many years ago in 1926. On the reversal of the Tohunga Suppression Act and Apirana Ngata, and many of our wise kaumātua of the day established the New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts here in Rotorua, was hopefully established centres of excellence that eventually promote, perpetuate and protect our culture. And I'm sure if they were to be here today and to see Te Ahi Tupu in all its glory, they'd be very happy with what has been achieved, not only by the New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts, but by collaboration with Council and many of the other key partners that have contributed to this beautiful sculpture. I started just over 4 years ago, so when I started, the ball was already in motion. I must pay respect to Mauri Ora and to Taparoto Nicholson, our Pautuara, and to Clive Fugel, who they came together and came up with the initial concept and kōrero around weaving in the narrative of Ngā Toroirangi. Him calling to his sisters back in Hawaii, Kuiwai and Haungaroa, and sending forth Te Pupu and Te Hoata to bring the baskets of fire. So for us, this is all about innovation. We wanted to do something that nobody had ever done before. We pressed the boundaries, and any of us will know that whenever you do something that no one's done before, it does creativity and innovation, when that comes together, can be a challenge as well. So and the scale and the size of this taonga. But when we finally unveiled it last week and had the whakatō Māori process, we were very happy to share in that with Council and all the partners that contribute to the success. As I said, Te Ahi Tupu has been a groundbreaking piece of work, huge degrees of creativity right from the outset, and an extremely technical process. The young boy that you might have seen right at the start there with his mother, he was there the day that the Black Hawk, the kahu flew Te Ahi Tupua into place, and he was there the night when we turned the lights on, and he just happened to drive past with his mother, and to see his eyes light up, and lots of other young tamariki, Māori, non-Māori, show up there to Te Ahi Tupua and just go, wow. For us, that's what it's all about planting that seed and that creativity in these young tamariki, whether they're from Rotorua or not. We wanted to support the council in terms of the council's aim to revitalise the city's gateways as well. And we think we've done that. We're really, really happy with the end result. But as I said, for us, it's about sowing that seed in the next generation for them to think outside of the square and for them to realise that they have unlimited potential. Already, with our own students at New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts Institute, already it's enabled them to think outside the square and to realise that they can achieve whatever they want in life. So, other than, as I said, what we're mandated to do, I think that the reach of this sculpture we can all be really, 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 really proud of. Te Ahi Tukua was also a name that we had a wānanga about with Te Tatau o Te Arawa. We sat down and thought, well, what's a nice, easy name that even non-Māori can pronounce as well. Te Ahi Tukua encompasses all that narrative has, the internal flame or the internal fire. And we hope that residents who live here in Rotorua, who feel a sense of home, that when they see this sculpture, that it sits fondly with them. And for people that may leave our shores and come home, that also reminds them of home. So koira noiho, I don't want to steal the thunder because Stacey is the designer and he was there before me, Stacey Gordain. And I'll leave it up to Stacey to talk a little bit more about some of the other design elements and how he found this kaupapa. Tēnā koe.
Kua anō tēnā rā koutou, te toko e ngā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa, tēnā rā koutou. Thanks, Naraya. Yeah, so for me, starting in 2015 on this project, at the initial hui with Rotorua Nixon, Koro Clive, it was Eugene Cutter and Cuts Maihi, and we were called together with and basically top of that time outlined the kaupapa of the redevelopment of the roundabout, and then that there was going to be a significant sculptural piece to go alongside that. So at that point, there was going to be a submission process. So we worked on our initial designs there. I just really want to say that even though I became the lead designer of the project, there was many others along the road that had input both into the kōrero, the kaupapa, and the design elements. And so it really is a team effort on our behalf, even though I ultimately became the lead of the project. It was my first large public artwork, and the scale of my normal work, we worked it out the other day, it's actually 1,000% increase in my normal scale of the type of work that I do. And I'll probably say over the journey of this project as well, it's probably been 1,000% learning curve really with all the things that I've learned. But for me, it was, the main thing that underlines it all is the kaupapa and the kōrero, and that's what I've tried to hold the whole way through, even through all the ups and downs, the long time periods, all of the ins and outs of the project itself. It was an epic journey, but the kaupapa and the kōrero was for me the most important element of it all. And really, I tried to make it, to build on what Araya laid out there with that narrative of Ngā Toroirangi and the coming of the wera me te ahi, te pupu and te hoata. Around that, I took that as the central theme, but into that, I wanted to make it as inclusive as possible of the wider community. And these were the things that were laid out of the original kaupapa to cover not only that narrative, but to touch on things. And I guess, the form itself, it's quite a complex, detailed form. And then the layers of the kōrero and kaupapa is quite complex and detailed that runs along with it. So it's the physical representation of that detailed narrative that touches on a wider themes. And it comes from geothermal energy, fire, flames, swirling smoke, steam, geyser, volcanic eruption, steam vents, steam erupting from a geyser, travels up under the ground in a vortex of heat, fire, flames, steam eruptions, etc. And it's almost like a basket, a kite form, which really represents one of those kite that were brought from Hawaii. And these natural features are really metaphorical for te ahi ka, which is the home fires, tangata whenua, iwi kāinga, home peoples, te arawa iwi, sub-tribes, occupation, mana whenua, kaitiakitanga, occupation of te whakarewarewa, marker of occupation, a fire that will never go out, Ngāti Wāhiao, Ngāti Whakauē and Tūhaurangi. There was a marker of boundaries, tribal and more recent town-city county boundaries, a marker, a gateway, pathways, journeys, both of Ngā Toroirangi and modern-day travellers, an entry-exit point, beginnings, endings, connections with other rohi and tribal groups, for example, Ngāti Tūwharetoa, and connections to Hawaii, navigation, both ancient and modern, manaakitanga, it's really metaphorical for the warmth shown to visitors, guiding, which references the guiding, hosting, hospitality and tourism industry, geothermal reflecting the activities of the region, the rich natural features and the environment, kaitiakitanga o te whenua, guardianship of natural features, resources and environment, and how ultimately we should take our lead from mana whenua, for these are the people that are, sat alongside this environment. Eruption, excitement, joy, thrill of the activities on offer, the various tourism, geothermal, cultural adventure, leisure, fun, etc. Heat up various industries and businesses, activities of the region, seeking skyward, pursuit of education, learning and knowledge, toi oho mai, references toi oho mai and NZ Maki, striving and sharing. The whole design feature, when I looked at the roundabout and the form with the sunken centre and the raised road, really reflects a miniature caldera of the region itself. And not only that, when I was designing the work, I tried to, it had to work on many levels. It had to work at a distance as you were driving. It had to work as you were right around the roundabout. It had to work for the people that were walking through the underpass, cyclists, pedestrians, all of those things. So I had to work on all those. I tried to create a form that worked at different levels. Because it's circular in nature, no matter where you are or what distance, there's always a different angle. And that sunken aspect of it really reflects the subterranean nature of Te Pupu and Te Hoata and the journey of the Wera me Te Ahi. And then again, that inclusiveness, the four outer bands, Ngā Hau e Whā, which really for me touches on, all of the peoples that have come and lit their fire here, all of the various cultures that make up this region. So again, I just tried to make it as inclusive as possible based around that original narrative. The cardinal points, peoples of the four winds, the various cultures and ethnic groups who combine to make up the community of the region, and how they swirl about and interact with each other, unique yet connected. And the 8 main bands, obviously Ngā Pūmanawa e Waru, again a reference Namahi atu ki Te Iwi Kāinga, Te Aroa, the 8 beating hearts. And so the inner vortex itself is symbolic of the spiritual power, mana of Ngā Toroirangi, his calling skyward, and the outer vortex symbolically surrounded by the heat and warmth formed by Hawaii, by the siblings. And the Manaia and Wheku elements obviously representing Te Pupu and Te Hoata as they are emerging from their subterranean journey, because they emerged as they were looking at, so that emerging aspect. And then the 6 smaller manaia heads reference the six kete filled with embers carried by the sisters. And so the design was derived from customary whakairo rākau forms, particularly surface patterns, whakarare, which means to be news, and so that whole swirling nature of it all, but interpreted in a contemporary modern way. Interesting enough, my first initial design element was more of a customary type form, and it was rejected by my boss at the time in favour. He wanted me to follow more of a contemporary type design, and then over the course and the journey of that, I've come to realise that a contemporary design really has a wider appeal to the wider community. It gives them more of an in, and like I referenced the other day, talking back to the install day, and this koro Pākehā came up to me and he said, I think it's absolutely beautiful, but what is the meaning behind it? And so it becomes, and that's what I really hope that this piece would achieve, is so, the wider community would learn, about the stories of this region. That's what it ultimately symbolises for me. When we're trying to light these 2 young girls that came in with their whānau, and just the look in their eyes, it really was like magic to them just looking at it. And so just the feedback like that from the community has been amazing. I guess, so for me it's been a huge journey. There's lots of layers to it. I just really hope people understand the layers and the intent of the inclusiveness to the wider community. I could talk about other things or answer questions or hey, that's fine.
So thank you both for coming in and sharing that kōrero. I really wanted to mark the end of the installation process with, obviously we had the karakia there, but I also wanted to give the perspective from the artist, just so that we can all have that understanding around the meaning and the intention of inclusivity of the sculpture. So thank you both for coming in. I'm happy to answer any questions or...
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't think we need any questions on this. I think it's a great celebration and opportunity. And thank you very much to you, Stacey, the artist in Uraia from Te Puia, for coming to us and explaining exactly what that sculpture means to us. You mentioned planting a seed. It's much more than that. You planted knowledge of our history, knowledge of our culture, and most importantly, hope. Because when Ngāti Roirangi was on Tongariro and he called his sisters over because he was freezing, that's how we got GFM here in Rotorua, and that's a very, very important token in the middle of what previously was the most dangerous intersection that we had. I think it was top 4 most dangerous intersection in New Zealand. So to make it a safe place, to bring life there, I'm very, very grateful for that. I will actually allow Councillor Maxwell as our cultural ambassador just to provide some closing remarks and perhaps a thank you. Then her worship and we'll wrap up. But thank you very much for this explanation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tuatahi ka te mea o kia koutou, nā mai haere mai ki tēnei te whare o te kaunihera o Rotorua. Taku I rā mutu a rā, tēnā koe, ngā mihi o te tau o kia koutou. First of all, an apology, I couldn't get to the opening. I was just out of the district, and I did want to be there from the beginning because I was on the panel, the selection panel, some 5 or 6 years ago with other people from our community that chose the workstation. It was good to hear you repeat it again. And that's how you sold it to us too on the day that we did the selection process from about a dozen other from around the whole motu. And at Aya you did say, shucks, it was a challenge, yeah. I think because of the delays, perhaps it was a challenge. But hey, look, the Sydney Opera House was hugely controversial. And that was a huge challenge, but it's a world icon now. Who would now turn that down? And I believe now Te Ahi People is going to become one of our world icons too. That's my belief. But thank you and the opportunity for coming in to give us the kōrero, well, give me the kōrero again, but for my colleagues to hear from the artist, from the person who had the dream, and you mentioned Modi Order and Taparoto and all of them at the time. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming in and giving us the kōrero about it, and it's going to be something we're all proud of. Kia ora koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Your Worship.
Kia ora and welcome here, and we're very humbled to have you. I didn't know this presentation was going to happen. To me, thoughts going through my mind, and I'm sure other councillors and community board members here in Te Tato, was what a gift we've got in a partnership. What a gift we've got that this came through Te Tato, but also strengthens that relationship with Te Puia. And it's not an installation, and I don't often hear artists talk about their work. Stacey, that was a magnificent story, and that story needs to be written. And I know in Wellington they put some of these stories in stone on the flag stones around places, but that story is magnificent for all of us to hear about inclusion, about our community, about ngā hui whā, and those that we welcome here in that place. So, well done. It's always controversial public art. It was never going to be easy, and we've now got a legacy work that when we all understand, and our children, and we say it's about mokopuna decisions, and my grandchildren understand how magnificent. And for us to have that now, it will take its place organically in the story of Rotorua. And the whole of the future of this place, the central pole is our culture. Anywhere in the world you've got forests, lakes, you've got beautiful places to visit, but telling our own stories is the future of New Zealand and Aotearoa, and that's very clear for us. And I just say, I can't wait for the next one. Where else Stavros will work with Te Waka Kotahi about another intersection, another public safety, as you mentioned, Tania, about that's what this began from, fixing the fourth worst intersection in New Zealand. Well, we now need a roundabout outside the airport, and what a wonderful story that will be when we get our thinking caps on about another place and way to say welcome to Rotorua. So well done. It's a beautiful story. I know we'll all celebrate it, even those that didn't understand it. But it's so helpful that you've come and shared that with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes the first session of our meeting. We'll now have a short break for morning tea. We'll be back at 11:30. Thank you very much. All right, welcome back everybody. We will resume our meeting. Thanks for the little bit of extra time for us. There was a lot of catching up to do. We move us now to page 32 of our agenda. I'd like to invite Stavros up to overview his report as our Manager for Infrastructure Group. He's got a PowerPoint for us this morning on Transport, Tengai, Central, West and Stormwater. So we'll allow Stavros to go through his presentation. We'll take any questions at the end, and then following that we'll go through the report. Thank you very much, Stavros.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou katoa. To you, Madam Chair. I will take the report as read. I do have a 3 or 4 points I would like to make an effort or put some focus into that. And of course, more than happy to take questions on any of these PowerPoints or anything that's included in the broader reports. If I would sort of preface everything I'm going to say from the context of the discussions you have had earlier with other colleagues, other GMs, with regards to housing, safety, and general considerations for our growth. I think the points I'm trying to make here for your information and your awareness, I suppose, I think are all consistent with our overall efforts to achieve improvements to our housing and to our thriving communities, expectations here too. So starting with, we've got, I think it's important to note that at the moment, we have in progress somewhere in the region of $100 million worth of external investment, which is done by Waka Kotahi onto our 3 main state highways. And I'm fully appreciative and aware. I do read the social media. I will read, news posts, and obviously get a lot of emails, from people who express rightfully sometimes a degree of frustration about the delays, and the constraints that construction works cause for travelers and to the ability of people to get from point A to point B. It is, though, quite important for us and for you as elected, governance board to understand and place those works in the context of creating a future capacity to unlock land development that basically will create the potential for billions of dollars worth of economic development in our districts. As JP said earlier, and if you look into a spatial plan, we've got somewhere in the region of 45,000 housing units to be built in our spatial plan, and without the capacity in our transport corridors to accommodate that, we could not consent them and we could not be getting the fruits of that kind of economic activity. So stage one of the Eastern Corridor, this is the intersection of Sala and Tinai Road, has been completed just before Christmas. As you're aware, it caused some significant complaints about the delays caused for that. But observations at the early stage indicates that intersection is performing much better than it used to. And of course now the effort is centered and shifted to the Tarawera roundabout and the sheer paths linking Sala to the Tarawera and to Isles Road. The next phase, it's for stage one, it's going to be from stage one to stage two, and that is a $40 to $60 million worth of investment. And that takes a corridor from Isles Road all the way to the airport. Her Worship the Mayor said earlier she's looking forward to an entry point at the roundabout at the airport, and we continue to aspire to that and push Waka Kotahi to progress it. However, what you will see in a report by NZTA to you on the 4th of March is a more detailed approach how the $35 million that's been secured through the CIP program will be spent in the next 12 to 18 months' time. They do have a performance expectation and a constraint, like we do for our CIP, that the funds we got from the Karaon Infrastructure Program have to be spent by March, April next year. So the NZTA will come for a presentation for March, and will tell you the improvements they do to major intersections from Isles Road to Bisley to Brent Road, Offata Road, Wharenui Road, and Gees Road. And again, I would like to remind all of us that the primary consideration is to enable the unlocking of land for development on either side of that state highway corridor. We continue to work with the airport business park developments and NZTA to make sure that those two are aligned. So when they come in the total timing synchronicity, the intersection, the entry point to the airport will continue to will be implemented at the same time. And at that point in time, another gate entry should be considered. Another element of the state highway work we do with NZTA is the central corridor from Sala to Old Tapa Road, and that is schematic, linking that kind of corridor. And again, the main emphasis here is that NZTA and Waka Kotahi will develop it to a stage which is consistent with urban planning. And again, we had JP said earlier about the CBD developments. And again, managing the environment in and around the CBD in terms of transportation and functionality is quite important to how CBD will look in the future. So this is a program worth between $20 and $25 million. Funding agreements will be allowed by the NZTA board in this month actually, but construction work will not be expected to start until the late part of this calendar year because, we want to time it not to be all at the same time as stage one and stage two of the State Highway 30, has taking place. So this again is the pipeline over the next 12 to 18 months. You see that what's taking place, and eventually that corridor will be relocated and given back to the city as a city asset. And again, works have commenced on the $14 to $16 million improvements on the Nongodaha roundabout and the corridor heading towards Hamilton. And we're also talking to NZTA about their funding contribution for improvements to the Nongodaha village. And again, these are significant enabling works to allow and unlock land development and economic activity to the west and north of the city. Now, I want to go to the second subject is with regards to stormwater plans and what we do around the city for economic development. Now, again, as I said earlier, I'm very cognizant, and it's even earlier today, you as elected members sought answers to what do we do to enable developers to progress forward. Also, you are probably aware too that with regards to social media and general inquiries get from the public, we do get a lot of different positions. Some people argue that why should the ratepayers pay for the developers. Developers sometimes ask why isn't the city got enough capacity to allow us to develop in an easy way and so on. So I would make no excuse because I want to labour again this point here. These are not easy challenges we have. And you can see in front of you, I'm using the western side for development because you can see the extent of the challenges we've got there too. If you take the Yutahina side, which is on the west of your side, or Pukehangi development, you can see the whole catchment. Now, all these tributaries flow and collect water from the rural area, from the hills around the city, from the caldera, and take it all the way to the Yutahina. And of course, in getting to the Yutahina, you're going through our urban side. Not a hell of a lot you can do what the urban side has been and developed already. However, climate change, the modelling that has been applied at the moment to calculate the intensity and the frequency and the quantity of rain as a result of climate change has been updated by 20%. Basically, in simple terms, if you had a house that was generating X amount of water from rain yesterday, in the near future will generate X plus 20%. And there's not much you can do. You cannot go and relocate, those houses. And all that water runs to the Yutahina. At the bottom line of Yutahina, the bottom end of the Yutahina stream, to the left-hand side, you've got commercial and business properties. They are at the moment at risk of flooding, and actually they do get flooded every now and then, not inside the buildings, but in their yards. That flooding causes pollution to the lower Yutahina, which, if you talk to the community in Ohinemutu, they will tell you that they're very concerned about the water pollution arising from flooding. And therefore, the Ohinemutu community would like the volume of water in the Yutahina to be reduced in order to reduce that kind of pollution. If you go to the extreme west of our catchments, those yellow areas and the development sites there, you will listen from a developer saying, let the water run. But of course, the questions run to where. And I do want to sort of, make some points here too, because, what do we do with our master planning? And as JP said earlier, that we anticipate our growth to take place 40% in as a densification outcome. And the other 60% will come from green developments. So, in considering these situations there, we started working into our master plan, and you can see here we've got a plan change 2 on the left-hand side, and we've got those circular areas. I think I've got a point here I can show. Yeah, those areas here, which basically we have identified areas where we can achieve community storage. And we are working to all the enabling works to identify that. Both to the west and to the east, we've got the Crown infrastructure funding of $15 million and $7 million, and we're going to use that over the next 12 to 18 months to create attenuation. It cannot get away from the fact that we actually need to create on-site attenuation too. Where you have densification, urban densification, there's not a hell of a lot we can do for on-site attenuation. But when you have greenfield development, we can create storage on site. A certain section of the land can be used to store water to allow it to move forwards. And again, it is a challenging task because basically what we have to create is something like that. These are schematics for the Western, that's the Ride Park and the Linton Park. We're basically going to create in reserve lands a resemblance of dams. We hold the water to allow it to progress further downhill in a controlled way. And I'm sure you get it, and I read in the social media and everywhere else too. The question in simple words is saying, why don't you put more bigger pipes to take the water away? And I will tell you why you cannot put bigger pipes, to take the water away. First of all What we have here is that every time we have an event which we use for design purposes, we call the 1% AEP, which is basically an average event that, will occur, statistically once in 100 years, and that's the design standards we need to use. It will generate about 30 million cubic meters, of water in a 24-hour period. Probably a lot of people will say, what's 30 million cubic meters of water? Well, I'll give you an example, but the closest approximation we have for a piped network that takes liquid from each individual house, conveys it down to a collection point, is a sewage system. You have pipes at every house, take the sewage, go into main pipes, from main pipes to a treatment plant. That's the closest approximation we have for a piped network that conveys liquid from point A to point B. It conveys about 20 to 30,000 cubic meters of water each day, whether it's wet or whether it's dry weather. The pipe network is worth about $250 to $300 million. Now compare 20 to 30,000 cubic meters of sewage to 30 million cubic meters of sewage, and do the maths, and you'll find that what you need to invest to have a pipe network to convey 30 million cubic meters of water from point A to point B. So therefore, going back, it's quite important to understand why you have to build these attenuation dams there too. So the combination of on-site storage for greenfields, creating attenuation and storage in public spaces, we call it community storage here, will hold enough of that stormwater to drip feed it into the main Utahina channel, so the businesses downhill and the Ohinamutu communities and all other concerned people have a comfort that we're managing that effect of climate change, densification, and growth in a way that does not create neither environmental, neither health, neither property risks down here. So it's a challenge. It is not insurmountable. We have a master plan right now. As I said, this is sketched here. It tells you that we aim to attenuate and storage about 1 million cubic meters, on a 24-hour intensive rain period. We're almost there. We are working on to that. We have money from the CIP. We have to use that money within the next 12 to 18 months' time. We are now engaging into detailed geotechnical work because we have to make sure when you hold water in a public space, we ask the question, is the ground suitable to hold 120,000 cubic meters of water without having a liquefaction effect and create a collapsing dam, flooding properties downstream. So we're doing all those work at the moment, and within the next 2-3 months, we'll have the answers, and we will start physical construction of this work. By doing that, we give more confidence to landowners and developers, so we can have a system we can connect to it. But certainly having the question piped everything somewhere, it's simply non-viable. And I think it's simplistic, and sometimes, it is creating ambiguity into why the council notionally is not helping development, or who is going to pay for it. As I said, if you were to pipe the whole thing, we're talking about billions of dollars of pipe networks. You cannot do that. Therefore, you need to use a combination of storage, attenuation, conveyance, and management of flows to achieve the outcomes we want to do, and we will get there. We're moving in the right direction. I'll finish that, and I can take questions if you want, if it's okay. Another ephemeral subject recently in the media, and especially with the announcement of Bay of Plenty with regards to water supplies, has been about the dry weather for the summer. And there were some discussions about whether we have to impose demand constraints, to the consumption of water. That might be correct to some of our neighbors in the area because they rely heavily on surface storage. The situation here in Rotorua is quite different. We're fortunate enough that in setting our goals for drinking water supply and demand management in considering the security and reliability of our supply, that we do have access to secure sources, but access to secure sources relies heavily on healthy and productive and a meaningful relationship with iwi, because we take water from springs, and those springs derive their water from rainfall that fell 40, 50, 60 years ago. So what happened this summer is totally irrelevant to it. However, it does have an effect onto what we call the residual kaitiaki flow on the streams, and that's where iwi are very keen to make sure we don't exceed our resource consents or how much water we take from that. We have not exceeded our resource consent allocation so far, and we carefully manage the balancing of flows from the springs to reservoirs and overnight refilling of the reservoirs to make sure we don't breach the resource consents. Because if we do breach the resource consents, that means we are breaching the trust or confidence got by those iwi. And we are very careful to avoid doing that. So we do have have to make sure that the quality of water to ensure we have our good health standards. We've got enough storage capacity, but in the future with population growth, we're planning in the LTP for additional storage, and you will see it in your LTP plans. Also, we're planning for additional resiliency because pipes break from time to time. And we do have to make sure we've got alternative supply lines. So everyone can understand when we turn a pipe in one side, we create redundancy to take us to another side. Aona. Also, we need to have a conservation focus. We do apply conservation because sometimes we don't have enough storage. And we say that if we use all the water in our current storage, that means we need to spend more money into creating more storage. But we don't have the problem with storage in Rotorua. We have springs. We're not short of water in Rotorua. We've got the lakes that provide us close to about 2-3 billion cubic meters of water if we need to access it. We don't need it yet. We have plans to get to that. Also, conservation encourages efficiency, low wastages. Again, we lose water from our public pipes. We lose them because our pipes are getting older. In your LTP, you'll find that we dedicated more investment into leak detection and proactive management of renewals to minimize that, and we'll continue to work onto that. Also, we need to make sure that it is cost-effective interventions that meet the levels of service and demand, and obviously how well we gain the trust and confidence of the community. It's very hard to go to the community and ask them to conserve water if they see your own public pipes leaking like sieves. So we need to make sure that we address first the areas that is under our control, have an effective control system, management system that encourages the community to achieve demand management. I have to say that there are voices out there who say impose water meters, impose restrictions. This community, every time we make the appeal every summer to say, please conserve water. In general, manage the water consumption and achieve between 10 and 50% less consumption than on average on peak. So basically the goodwill of the community so far has been sufficient to allow us to meet our peak demand management requirements. And I think it's quite important to maintain that goodwill through the actions we are taking. And one final area that that has been making the rounds in both in the national media and local media, and I have a number of inquiries from people too, is whether trade waste creates risks in our wastewater system. I think the stories went around that some industrial sites have been dumping trade waste into the sewage system, causing some potential harm to the environment and harm to the systems. Obviously, we have a wastewater management system to protect primarily public health, to protect our environment, to create an ability for growth in the future, and to make sure that our community is served by a reliable service that protects their general well-being. In Rotorua, we have somewhere in the region of 950 trade waste consents. Those 950 consents represent about 8.5% of the total wastewater that gets to our wastewater treatment plant. We do not monitor actively all of them. We monitor about 5 of them, who generate about 40% of that 8%. So half of the trade waste that goes to the treatment plant are actively monitored. And to this day, the approach we have taken is that we define the expectations for the trade waste through conditions. We have an excellent relationship with people who have that trade waste, because they do understand that if you have to intervene and apply RMA enforcement rules into that, they will lose. They rely heavily on complying with that, but also they have a good citizen approach to the whole process. The majority of the 950 trade waste consent relates to food outlets, restaurants, cafes, that kind of thing. They've got grease traps and so on. And of course, the first sign of trouble, if those don't work, is going to be in their own premises, and they're not keen not to have that in their premises there too. It is a reality that we run a biggest risk to our treatment plant from private sewage connections, my house and your houses. In early January, I had a little bit of a concern, heightened concern, because something got to our treatment plant that killed all the bacteria. The pH of the liquids that entered the waste treatment plant was 2, which is basically total toxic and killed all our bacteria. We have contingency plans for that. Really, they are responsible to identify the reasons for that and take actions to avoid breaching our resource consents. We have not been able to identify the source because it came none from our trade waste, consented trade waste areas. There is some suspicion that, that product was produced perhaps by the illegal manufacturing of drugs, of meth. But the incidents came through some spiked areas, and by the time it distributed into the entire network, heavily diluted, to be able to trace it exactly what's happening. So all we're saying here is that despite a lot of news media about the risk trade waste premises create, to switch system, our trade waste consents are designed to manage that situation. We have a bigger risk from individual private property owners, but again, we have a contract that requires the contractor to take responsibility, identify and report to us mitigation actions, and we're working through that in that process. So that's what I would say. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stavros. We'll take questions on the presentation first and then go into the report. Your Worship, the Mayor.
The premise that you began your discussion with, I didn't get. The X plus is 20. You can expect 20% more water. Is that because of 1 degree of climate change rise, or what is that linked to? Because we've always had that, the tributaries feeding into the lakes. What's causing that extra pressure?
The 2 reasons for that. Obviously, the climate change warming effect creates higher precipitation. The frequency and intensity of rain is higher than it used to be. What they used to call a 1 in 100-year event, in the engineering we call it 1% AEP, but the statistical application of how frequently these things happen probably reaches down to 1 in 50 years now. So you can expect a gradual volume of water falling onto the roofs of our houses, more frequent, at higher intensity, and therefore the total volume of water generated to be captured is at least 20% more than was.
I get you. Thank you for that basic lesson with me.
Okay.
Just the other, we're getting our heads around the attenuation and the need to hold water. I don't want to add more costs because I know it's the LTP, but can we ever use sprinkler systems from that? I know Melbourne did attenuation and then sprinkler right through the central CBD, and it watered the trees that they planted in the CBD. Is that just out of the ballpark for us to ever consider in our LTP.
Sorry, you mean to use stormwater for irrigation purposes? Well, no, it's not the question. The question you have to ask yourself, ourselves, I suppose, is that when we used to dispose of that water, it's at the time when a heavy rainfall. That's not the time we need to water a garden, I suppose. But at the same time, remember our wastewater treatment plant. We will explore and are obligated to explore beneficial uses of 20,000 cubic meters of highly treated wastewater, and we will put into that process, there too. I suppose the point I'm trying to make with stormwater is that the volume of stormwater generated at this point in time is huge compared to any other system we've got. So therefore, it needs to be managed both on-site for new developments. There's not much you can do about densification because I cannot go to your house and my house and say, dig a big hole and store 50 cubic meters of water. You don't have the space to do that. So therefore, we need to have community storage, and that's what we do in the parks. And you have to combine the two together to feed the water into streams in a way that the streams can cope without causing downstream effects.
Thank you. Ms. Rothwell.
I think most of my questions have actually been answered through what the Mayor has just asked you, because mine was around new builds and actually collecting rainwater like we used to do in days gone by when we didn't have reticulation for drinking water. And I've lived in many properties where we collected our own water off the roof and got very scared at times when we saw what was in the tank underneath the deck or wherever it was. But is it, anything that could be followed through for the future to perhaps have new builds that were appropriate sizes collecting their own rainwater or stormwater?
Yes, we do, and we will continue to think about it. We have to be very clear why we do it. If we do it to offset the need to use spring water for our drinking water supplies, for example, to reduce the amount of water, you need to ask the question, if you require every resident to put a water tank to collect rainwater, let's say cubic meter of water, and every resident will incur somewhere in the region of $1,000 to $2,000 to install those tanks, then you've got a community expense of somewhere in the region of $25 to $50 million. And you have to ask yourself, for $25 or $50 million, can I do something better? Can I take the water from the lakes, for example, which is in abundance, treat it, and distribute it? So, it's a business case to understand why you do it. If you want to do it to reduce the runoff, stormwater runoff, 5,000 or 50,000 cubic meters of water attenuation compared to 30 million cubic meters of water a heavy rain generates is basically nothing. So, yes, you can do these sort of things, but you need to ask the question, what is the aim, what is the cost, and what are the alternative options so that we would achieve the same objective.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson, followed by Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can we have a quick look at that table that shows the different dams being proposed? A table. This is it? Yes, yes.
For the west side, Councillor McPherson.
Yes, yes. Now, you've got this for the west side, and I dare say you've got similar plans for the other parts of Rotorua. Have the costings been done to build, complete, and ensure the health and safety of these constructions? Are they part of your budget for this year? Or do they exceed your budget for this year? My original question was, do you have enough resources to complete this work? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Sorry, I was interrupting you. Yes, I think the intention of the spatial plan is to identify what needs to be done to achieve the aim of having a stormwater master plan that enables housing. We have identified that. We've done the costing. The LTP, you'll find that in our LTP, in the 30-year infrastructure strategy, clearly identifies the stormwater requirements, somewhere in the region of $60 million altogether. The timing of it, of course, will depend on how quickly development takes place. And we've got in parallel with that for stormwater, our normal renewal process is about $3 million a year, which is our depreciation. So the LTP and the infrastructure strategy identified what needs to be done, what is the cost. It's a little bit agnostic about the timing at the moment, but we can always adjust it depending on how quickly you accelerate the plan. And there are some technical issues, as I said, geotechnical work, liquefaction and dam mitigation processes that we need to follow at the moment, which we are undertaking at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, just a couple of comments and a couple of questions, please, Stavros. Great to see this work happening, and I don't think it can happen soon enough if we cast our minds back to the 2017 ex-tropical cyclones and also the Ngātaha flood. And I read a release, Madam Chair, where I think it was Ohoki or Ohiwa had 71 millimetres in an hour in one rainfall event over this festive season just gone, which is, that's biblical proportions, really. So I hope we don't ever get that. But in terms of the killing off of the biomass, that's really concerning, and I appreciate the transparency of having it in this report. It sounds like great work by Trilogy in responding to the event, but I wonder, is there planning in the upgraded wastewater treatment plant that at the pre-screening phase we can anticipate and shut off any such incursion into the plant in the future? Will there be testing or some sort of an alarm that can prevent that from occurring again? Because, we risk serious consequences if the plant fails. That was my main question, and I was asked a question at a ratepayers meeting last night. Do we ever test for COVID in our wastewater system? I see we're cleaning out a gross pollutant trap or something of that nature near the Sedema, and that just sort of pricked my curiosity at the same time. So a lot to ask.
Yeah. We don't test for COVID, but the ESR and the police are doing some regular testing of other things, and also as part and parcel of our pre-application for the upgraded treatment plant concerns, we require to identify what we call emerging organic contaminants, EOCs. About 70 of them relate to hormones and medications and so on. We're testing because we're still not fully aware of what's happening, the effects of them. Now, with regards to the toxicity of the substance that hit our biomass, Trilogy now, together with our laboratory, are working to identify testing spaces, and we'll focus attention on what we call inhibitors. Inhibitors are just substances that can stop the bacterial life, I suppose. It's been difficult, if they come in spikes, by the time they come into the system, probably you can isolate it, but it's easier said than done, because you do have wastewater come from many different directions. And even though you might get a telemetry system which tells you that there is an inhibitor into the system, questions of what do you do with it. So we'll work on that more.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Stavros. And I think everything that we've discussed today is so important, and the climate action plan that will be brought to the SPNF meeting next week will address this as well, because climate change mitigation and adaptation and infrastructure has the main part of it. in terms of adaptation and mitigation. I just had a few questions and then also a comment as well. My first question was kind of following on to what Ms. Rothwell mentioned earlier on about the rainwater tanks. I know that early last year Auckland Council scrapped its resource consent fees for the installation of rainwater tanks at residential properties, and I thought, would that possibly be something that we could look into?
Yes, we could. However, my strong suggestion to you, it would be that if you consider that you as elected members need to be very clear as to what you're trying to achieve with it. It's either water conservation, is it stormwater mitigation, is it to reduce wastewater generation? We need to prepare for you a business case outlining the key objectives and options you may have with it. Thank you.
Thank you. And my second question was on on fly tipping that's been occurring quite often. I've heard from people in our community who do volunteer and remove a lot of the dumping that's happened, but they're really disappointed to see that sometimes even a few days after they removed it at their own expense as well, that it's returned and the rubbish has some people just don't care. Is there any other way of us tackling this issue? I know that there's been we've been placing some signs saying, I think it was like no dumping, etc., like signs like that around. But is there any other way that we could, police this closer?
Again, I think our approach at the moment it's a combination of actions. One, we recognize this is a community issue. I think we do collect somewhere in the region of about 13,000 tons of household waste every year. The amount of illegal dumping is about 100 tons a year. If you proportion pro rata, it's about less than 0.something% of the population. I would like to believe that the community action and community vigilance will discourage it. But we continue to actively educating and informing people, and where possible we will carry prosecution. However, I think it will be less it will be disingenuous if I promised you here that we have a magic solution to that other than a total community response to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just had a comment as well. Earlier last month we had the community event at Rotorua for the Rotorua wastewater treatment plant. And I just wanted to thank again Trility as well. I think they have done an amazing job there. In talking to the staff there, they were really passionate and really proud of the work that they're doing out there. And you could tell that they really know what they're talking about. And again, they're really, really proud. It's just such it's such an amazing outcome. So thank you to the whole team.
Thank you, Councillor Wing. We have Mr. Hurd, followed by Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Staff Ross. My question relates to your report on page 39, 673, that NDA, nitrogen discharges. And if I paraphrase that, the way I read it, it kind of says that the more we grow our urban area, the more nitrogen to discharge, the more we're going to have to find some way of offsetting that discharge. And from a rural community point of view, that's very concerning because we had felt that we'd done our bit with PC10. And the question I want to ask is, are we going to come back to the rural community and ask for yet more offsets from rural land to compensate for the increased urban discharges? And if so, do we stay vitally aware that the three primary drivers of this town are farming, forestry and tourism? That creates all the wealth that feeds everybody in the town. One's already taken a hit, And if we desecrate the farming any further, we're likely to undermine the whole economy.
Mr. Head, that's not my interpretation of it. I think the reality, I think the PC10 debate has been hard, I think what we do recognize, of course, as we grow, when we add another 5,000 houses into our special plan, then obviously we have asked the regional council to recognize that you're converting an empty land into housing. And then you no longer have NNP from that land, but you're getting into the switch system, and therefore our treatment plan credits need to recognize that 30 tons of nitrogen and 3 tons of phosphorus needs to be adjusted because we are transferring from greenfield into build site. So we're getting a bit more credits into our treatment plant processes. At some point in time, let's say, and I don't know the answer to that, just guesstimating, if our population grew to, let's say, 120,000 people, I don't know, in 30 or 40 or 50 years or whatever it is, maybe the answer is for us or the council, if it can no longer achieve more credits to our wastewater discharges, we might have to buy a piece of land in a rural side, and to offset, additional credits, we need here. So I don't think we have an impact on the rural community. It's our interaction with our commitments to meet our discharges into the receiving environment and how we offset that, in the fullness of time. So we need to continue work with it. I don't think we should be overly concerned in the next 20 years about that, my view. Maybe later on, if our population increases dramatically, we will. But at the moment, I think it's just a matter of rebalancing what's empty land versus built-up land. And we get enough credits in our treatment plan to do that. Or the other alternative, too, of course, is to put more money into the treatment plan. We can apply technology and achieve even lower nutrient reductions. It's going to cost them money, and we have to weigh it up. Does it cost more to upgrade the treatment plant processes or to buy some land and get some credits for that? And I don't know the answer until we get to the stage. Okay?
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stavros. I just wanted to know if there was any concern for us or any information regarding green waste. Are we going to be looking at green waste down the track sometime?
Councillor Kumar, in one of the workshops we had for the LTP, we identified that, we, as part of the LTP, we'll be consulting about that. And then the first year of the LTP, we'll get the community's reaction to that, and then you will decide whether you want to introduce it or not. So it's in the process now for consideration of the LTP.
And thank you for that. And supplementary to that is the water tanks. I believe in the new development mostly in Auckland, because they've got one cost issue for water in Auckland and the lack of it. So it's compulsory. And I don't think in Rotorua we're at that critical stage.
Now, as I said earlier, one of the problems we've got in some cities is that they rely heavily on surface storage. They collect water in winter, when it's rainfall, and then transmit it. So we don't rely on that, and we have plenty of surface storage too if you need to access it anyway. The question is that what makes economic sense.
Councillor Donaldson, and then we'll open it up if anyone has any other questions on the infrastructure group report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, it was just a further comment, and if I could seek your indulgence, Madam Chair, and adding to Stavros' response on the nitrogen discharge allowance for Lake Rotorua. And while I acknowledge the rural landowners in that catchment have their concerns and have done a significant amount, looking at our district holistically and our lakes holistically, we have to recognise also that we have wastewater coming from Lake Rotoiti, Otawa Marae and Hawkeri Falls, from Hamarana, which is a rural settlement, all formerly septic tanks now added into our wastewater treatment plant. We have wastewater coming from Lake Okaraka, which is out of the catchment, and in the future also Lake Tarawera coming into our wastewater treatment plant. So that has improved, is improving, and will continue to improve the health of all the Rotorua Te Arawa lakes. And so the wastewater treatment plant does need to be cut some slack because in terms of the big picture, it's performing a fantastic job in the health of all the lake systems. So I just felt, having sat through endless wastewater consultation on different schemes that we've put in, it's the big picture for the health of all the lakes that is the end prize here. While that does present some challenges for Lake Rotorua itself, the wastewater treatment plant is certainly doing its bit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. That is very good information for us. Was there any other questions on the Infrastructure Group report, which is from page 32 to page 40? There appear to be none. Thank you very much, Stavros. We now move to Thomas Colley, Manager of the Business Support Group. We are on page 40 now. I invite Thomas to the floor, and if anybody has any questions or points of clarification. That's page 40 to 41. There appear to be none. Thank you, Thomas. We now invite Gina Rangi, Manager of Manahautu Māori, to the floor. We are on page 41 if anyone's got any questions.
Tēnā tātou ia rangatira. I'll take it as read. One thing I did want to note was to thank those elected members and members on Te Tatau and the community boards who have responded positively to the March workshop. So as councillors know, as committee members know, we have a regular treaty-based workshop that we do with staff. It's part of our induction process, and really what it does is it gives people an experience on a Te Arawa marae. It explains to them some of the protocols that they're experiencing. Frequently, our staff have not been on a marae, or if they have, they haven't necessarily understood the protocols and what's going on. So that's part of the workshop. It also includes an understanding of some of the history of the country, and particularly of the Rotorua district. I just wanted to give a little plug for those who haven't been able to respond or who are only tentative at the moment. We have had several hundred staff go through that workshop, and all of them have enjoyed it immensely. It is one of the few places where you can have quite in-depth discussions with your colleagues and understand our shared history. So it's not just looking at the experience of Māori in the country, it looks at recent arrivals and just the diversity of our population. We have had people come on the course with absolutely no experience of Te Ao Māori or of treaty process, and they have absolutely enjoyed it. We've also had people with quite a lot of experience in both of those kaupapa who have also enjoyed it, because it is about the way in which you get to know your colleagues and the district that is quite unique. So that's my little plug, a little advertisement. We have had a number of people reply positively that they'll be in attendance. This particular workshop in March is set aside just for elected members and committee members, and that's because we wanted to provide a space where you're able to have quite, difficult conversations and feel safe to do that. And the facilitators are highly experienced at making that an engaging and positive experience for people. Kia ora. Any questions on my report or on the workshop?
Kia ora, Gina. Your Worship the Mayor.
At the that we had on the Rotorua Township agreement, it was so fantastic, and that I wondered if it couldn't be brought up here as part of the Arawa lecture series this year, because there's a lot of people that didn't go, heard about it later, and said, "Oh, I'd love to
have got, and we're always a bit late, aren't we? Like people rocking up late to book, but it was well received, and I think it's such a good story. It could come into the lecture series.
Thanks for that feedback. We'll take that back. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Sure, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. With the loss of Edu George, I wondered if the, not objective, but aim, I suppose, eventually of improving access for mana whenua to Pukehangi Pā will not slip off the agenda.
No, not
Thank
at all.
you.
Not at all. It's part of the planning framework that has been developed under the plan change, and also, as much as my uncle is deeply missed, our commitment is to all of mana whenua.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Gina. There appear to be no... Oh, sorry, Councillor O'Colate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I'd just bring it in at this point, and it's around the announcement that was made by the Minister of Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, recently about Māori wards and the requirement for setting up, and that's now going to become null and void. And I just know, because I think there's about, I don't know how many councils are currently on the books of trying to get Māori wards established in the area, and of course of the hindrance for that regulation that's been in place for so long and always getting overridden by the wider community, and of course now that's not. So I was just saying, you would have had lots of requests or people talking to you about it, I presume.
I'd say that there's a range of views. We are working with the governance team around representation review, and it's a part of that discussion. I think that's being reported to the next SPNF. Is that right, Una?
Maybe later. I think on that topic it is a very new announcement, and I'm sure that a paper will come to us at an appropriate time when we look at our representation review, but also when we have more information on how that may look. Yeah. Ms. Spray? Ms. Spray?
Sort of, Gina. Can you remind me who is the new position, the Te Arawa Engagement Lead?
It is a secondment of an existing staff member, Clark Perika. He was a special request from the Pukenga Koike and also from the museum team themselves. Thank you.
I think someone else had a question. Is it Councillor Kumar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Gina. Gina just wanted to know how we're going out with all our rollouts for bilingual signage.
We're fortunate that we have a licensed translator on staff, Kingy Biddle, and he's in frequent requests from across the organisation. One thing that we've been fortunate about is that those requests for translations often turn into bigger discussions around understanding a Māori worldview, which often shapes not only a translation of a document or of signage, but also an understanding of why certain values are held by Te Arawa, and it often changes the work program. I'll give you an example. For example, Arts and Culture have asked for translations of particular festivals around Matariki, for example. And through the discussion with Kingy, which came from a translation request, the focus and the way in which that festival was delivered changed, because they realised through that translation process that they hadn't necessarily understood what Matariki is. It's not necessarily a New Year celebration for Te Arawa. It is very much about thinking about those who have passed over the previous year. So translation requests within the council are often a way of actually understanding culture and heritage, understanding values, and it does shape the work programs that we're delivering.
Kia ora, Gina. We'll go Your Worship the Mayor and then Councillor Maxwell.
And also an update that we've met with the Chair of Te Tatou, if you recall that the gifting of Ruareo came through Te Tatou, and we're now saying we've discussed what's the next step, so that will come back, I'm sure, to Council at some stage. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. The question I have is, I went to the wonderful week-long basketball tournament down here at the Energy Event Centre. Were we involved with that translation? There was a huge video screen that was set up by some organisation, and they were doing translations, Maori words. I mean, this is a tournament that thousands come to, which I'm pleased that they do here in Rotorua. There used to be 90 teams participating. Now it's about 287. Is that our screen or somebody was that an outside organisation that was providing?
We often do provide support for major events that come to the city. In this case, I'm not aware that we were, and that's probably because Rotorua Basketball Association have a very good, and the New Zealand Māori tournament have very good internal resources already.
Yeah.
But for those events that don't necessarily have connections with either Māori translators or with Te Aroha communities, we do provide support to connect. Mm-hmm. And that's part of promoting the city to participants and ensuring that they enjoy their stay. That connection with mana whenua is really highly prized, but particularly by visitors to events, and it's often commented on. So we assist where we can. That includes making connections with mana whenua groups.
Thank you very much. There appear to be no other questions. Kia ora, Gina. This brings us into our resolution to go into public excluded on page 43. I'd like to advise that there is one item for consideration in the public excluded session, and that's Te Wharepanga or Te Aroha Structural Engineering Review. The reasons for going into confidential are because of commercial sensitivity, but also to enable commercial activities or commercial or industrial negotiations. I'd like a mover and a seconder for the motion. Moved Councillor McPherson, seconded Councillor Bentley. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 Thank you very much. We'll take a 2-minute break while we get ready to move into confidential.